We use thousands, maybe tens of thousands of words every single day without even thinking about it. But what if I told you that every word has a secret meaning, a hidden architecture inside of it that our brains just instantly decode? Well, in this explainer, we're going to put on our linguistic X-ray goggles and see what's really going on inside. So think about this. How is it that you can see a brand new word, maybe something really long and complicated, and you kind of just get it? You have a pretty good idea of what it means, right? Well, that's not magic. That's your brain acting like an expert code breaker, pulling words apart into their most basic pieces. Okay, let's take this word right here, unconsciousness. At first glance, it looks like one solid thing, right? A single block of meaning. But it's not. I promise you, by the end of this, you're going to see it as three totally separate pieces, all assembled in a very, very specific order. So what do we call these fundamental building blocks of language? Well, they do have a name, and they are the absolute core of how we build meaning in our language. So let's meet them. They're called morphemes. And a morpheme is simply the smallest possible unit of meaning in a language. Think about it. The word cat, that's one morpheme. It means that furry animal. But the word cats, that's actually two morphemes. You've got cat, the animal, and you've got s, which means more than one. Both pieces carry their own distinct meaning. They're like the atoms that build the molecules of our words. And the actual process of building with these morphemes, snapping them together like Lego bricks, that has a name too. It's called affixation. It's just the formal term for adding these meaningful little pieces to a root word to change it up or create something totally new. And the pieces themselves, the little bits we're adding on, like un or id or nis, those are called affixes. You can think of them as the power tools of language. They let us modify, adapt, and invent new concepts from a basic set of root words. Now, you probably think you know all about affixes, right? You learned about prefixes and suffixes back in school. But trust me, the world of affixes is so much bigger, and honestly, it's way, way cooler than you might think. So, as you can see from this chart, an affix is basically defined by one thing: location, location, location. Where you stick it on a word determines exactly what kind of affix it is. Let's take a quick tour, shall we? Okay, let's start with the ones we all know and love. Prefixes, of course, come before the root word, like un in undo. And suffixes, they get tacked on to the very end, like ing in doing. This is pretty much the bread and butter of how we build words in English. But what about putting something right in the middle of a word? Well, that's called an infix. Now, in formal, proper English, they're basically non-existent, but we use them all the time when we talk, usually for emphasis. In a word like abso-freaking-lutely, that freaking right in the middle, that's an infix, and it's shoved in there to give the word some extra punch. And this is where things get really fascinating, because it shows how incredibly diverse languages can be. Some, like Arabic, use something called a transfix. So they'll take a consonant root, like KTB, which has to do with writing, and then they weave different vowel patterns through it to create words. So kataba means he wrote, but kitab means book. The meaning is literally built from the inside out. It's absolutely incredible. Okay, so we know what affixes are, and we know where they go. But what do they actually do? Well, it turns out they have two very distinct jobs. One is all about creating brand new meaning, and the other is purely about grammar. Just take a look at these two examples. On one side, you add ish to boy and you get boyish. On the other, you add ed to sail and get sailed. Now, both ish and ed are suffixes, but they are doing fundamentally different work here. One is creating a whole new concept, while the other is just tweaking the word to make it fit into a sentence. So first up, we have what's called derivational morphology. And just like the name says, it derives a totally new word, a lot of times changing its grammatical category. For example, boy is a noun, but you add ish and you derive the adjective boyish. It's a new word with a new job. This is basically how our vocabulary expands. And on the other hand, you've got inflectional morphology. This type doesn't create new words at all. It just inflects, or, modifies, an existing word so that it fits the rules of grammar. Sail and sailed are the same core verb. That ed just tells you it happened in the past. It's a grammatical tweak, not a whole new entry in the dictionary. And here's the wild part. While English has tons and tons of derivational affixes that create new words, it only has 8. That's right, 8 inflectional morphemes. The entire grammatical machine of our language, plurals, possession, verb tenses, comparisons, it's all handled by this tiny, exclusive club of 8 suffixes. That's it.
This table really makes the difference crystal clear. Inflectional affixes are all about grammar, while derivatitional ones are about new meaning. We call that a lexical function. Inflectional affixes never change a word's class. A noun always stays a noun. But derivatitional ones, they do it all the time. And maybe most importantly, grammar forces you to use inflectional endings correctly. But using a derivatitional affix, that's always a choice you make to create a new word.
All right, we have our pieces, the morphemes. We know their 2 main jobs. So now it's time for the final step, the assembly instructions. Because it turns out, words have a very strict internal blueprint that you have to follow. Right, you can't just slap morphemes together any which way you want. Word formation is architectural. It's not chaotic. There is a very strict sequence, a hierarchy, that dictates exactly how the pieces have to connect to each other. Let's look at the blueprint for the word unsystematic. You have to start with the noun system. Then, the first step is you add -atic to turn it into the adjective systematic. Only then can you add the prefix un. Why? Because un attaches to adjectives, not to nouns. You couldn't make unsystem. It has to be done in that strict 2-step process. Here's another perfect example. To build the word carelessness, you have to start with the root noun care. First, you add the suffix less to derive the adjective careless. Then, you add the suffix ness to that new adjective to derive the final noun, carelessness. See? Each step builds logically right on top of the one before it. And that brings us all the way back to unconsciousness. Now, the blueprint is perfectly clear. You start with the adjective conscious. Step 1, you add the suffix ness to create the noun consciousness. And only then, as step 2, can you add the prefix un to create the final noun. It was never one solid piece. It's a 3-part assembly with a very precise architectural plan. So, you've just learned how to see the hidden skeleton inside of every complex word. This is more than just a cool party trick. It's like a new way of seeing the language you use every day. So the real question is, now that you have these X-ray goggles, what other incredible blueprints are you going to find hiding